Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Governed by God, a biblical look at law, civics, and government. My name is Eric Rupold. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. So today, I had the opportunity to interview David Fowler. He's been on the show in the past, maybe a couple of years ago. Former state senator from Tennessee, also worked as president on the Family Action Council of Tennessee. He's retired now, but still doing work in the area of law, namely trying to help Christians to have a biblical understanding of law. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about parental law, parental rights, child abuse, the common law, things like that, and how to approach these things from a biblical perspective. Before I go into the interview, I just want to say that this episode is sponsored by Future of Christendom. Now, Future of Christendom is based out of Lancaster County here in Pennsylvania and is dedicated to promoting the Lordship of Christ in every area of life. They offer a variety of videos, podcasts, articles, and books to strengthen your faith and your understanding of the law word of God. Now, this October, from October 9th to 11th, they will be having a conference with the theme of No Other Name, the supremacy of Christ amidst cults and counterfeit faiths. The keynote speaker at this conference is going to be from Jeff Durbin. Some of you may already know who that is in the realm of apologetics, especially in advocating for laws against abortion. But either way, Jeff Durbin is going to be at the conference as the keynote speaker. So if you wish to join us, I encourage you to please go to futureofchristendom.org. And if you go to the link there, you can sign up to get tickets for the conference, again, October 9th through 11th. If you type in the code Governed by God, you will get a 10% discount off of conference registration. So again, I plan on being there. I hope to see you there as well in October. So with that said, let's dive into the interview with David Fowler. Well, Dr. Fowler, thank you for coming on the show today. It's been a while. I know that you've been on before talking about the common law. It was a very helpful conversation. Very good episode there. So I'm glad that you're able to come back on today to talk about something a little bit different. So, but before we dive into the topic, can you just give an update to the audience as to who you are and what you've been doing since last time you were on the show?
Sure. Well, actually, let's see here. I'm a licensed attorney, still licensed, and practiced law until 1994 when I ran for the Tennessee State Senate against a 26-year incumbent Republican. You may have heard the term rhino. In fact, I think that's synonymous with Republican today. And one served for 12 years and then was blessed to start a pro-family public policy organization in Tennessee called the Family Action Council of Tennessee. It still exists, but I did retire at the end of December to pursue other things in the sphere of law that didn't tie me down to running an organization and having to raise money and being stuck down at the legislature, 4 months out of the year. So I'm gainfully unemployed right now and doing my podcast, my Substack, doing interviews with people like you, working with law students in the Christian Legal Society. So I'm loving retirement. I don't know how I had time to have a job, but anyway, it's just been good. That's my status.
All right. Well, congrats on the fact that you get to enjoy some retirement after working many decades to try to advocate for a biblical approach to law and protecting the family. So
sure.
Hopefully, more folks can do that. And, this podcast is just a small part of trying to bring that kind of awareness out to public. So the reason why I wanted to have you on is because I recently did an episode just briefly going over some of the interesting laws in some of the states, more of the liberal states regarding parental rights, custody, and all in relation to the transgender conversation there. And the one that I mentioned is Colorado House Bill 1312, which upon my reading of it, it's If a parent is not honoring the pronouns of the child, that could fit into the debate on does that parent get custody? Does that parent even allowed to see the child? Will the state intervene and kind of like just take the child out of the home and consider that abuse because you're not honoring the gender identity or pronouns of the child? So it's quite a radical thing, it seems like. But are you familiar with that law and other laws like it? What are your thoughts on that situation?
Well, you had mentioned that law, and I'd seen it in the newspaper. Well, I don't guess we have newspapers much anymore. I'd seen it online on the online news, and that word's going to be a hard one dying in our culture, isn't it? Newspaper. But I've been involved on these issues, particularly the whole issue of human sexuality, which really comes down to a question of human meaning and what is there any given nature to what it means to be human, and specifically male and female. And so I have prepared some amicus briefs that I filed, for instance, with the Sixth Circuit, because Tennessee passed a law dealing with these transgender issues in minors, and it was upheld on what I'd call non-substantive grounds. They didn't reach the real parental rights issue. It was sort of hailed as a victory because the law's still in place, but substantively, the court didn't get into it, just like with Dobbs. If you remember, Dobbs said, abortion was illegal at the time of the Constitution. It was illegal at the time of the 14th Amendment. So therefore, there can't be a due process liberty right in the 14th Amendment to abortion, because it would be the constitutionalization of what was a crime. That couldn't mean that. But they never addressed what it meant to be a person.
Yes.
And they punted the moral, philosophical, metaphysical, philosophical question of, well, what is a person and what are persons for? And just said, we don't know. Let's let every state decide for itself. Well, I've been very interested that it's far bigger than a legal issue.
Yeah, just for clarification purposes. So Tennessee, it seems like, is trying to use or create laws to, right, I guess, do the opposite of what Colorado is doing. So Colorado is, basically separating children from parents and advocating for the kind of transgenderism. But Tennessee is trying to protect the rights of parents. But you think that their method of going about it is problematic, and in what ways is it problematic?
Yeah, I think it is. And in fact, Tennessee passed last spring a parental rights bill, 10, 15 pages long, and it was spelling out, all these little things in a narrative form. And a lot of Christians were behind it and well-intentioned in doing so. They believe parents have rights and they want to see them protected. But the way Christians are going about it, and this is a probably strong statement to say, to me reveals how we are captured by Darwinian thinking and don't even realize it when it comes to these kinds of issues. And so if you don't understand the fundamental underlying cause for why this is happening, the abolition of parental rights, why parents, have to use the right pronouns, that Eric is actually Erica and needs to be called she, if you don't understand the underlying cause, you won't know how to approach it in a legal or constitutional sense. So, for example, I just saw a national Christian public policy organization say that the liberals have been trying to infiltrate our schools, and it started with the removal of the 10 Commandments. And so I posted on their Facebook page, I know the organization, I said, wrong. The 10 Commandments were removed, or the removal of the 10 Commandments was a symptom of a problem that began 100 years ago that made it reasonable to remove them. It was the symptom, it was the consequence of the erosion of the Christian worldview that made it even make sense. So until a Christian understanding of law and the Constitution is returned, we're never going to fix our problems by enacting statutes. And the fact that we think we can reveals how washed out our thinking is about most everything in the sphere of law. So let me give you an example.
Please.
On the parental rights case here in Tennessee about surgery, for example.
Okay.
I suggested a rewrite of the bill from this big long thing that was multiple pages, about doctors and standards of reviews and all this sort of stuff in medical science. And I said, no. The common law is the foundation of our nation's whole jurisprudence.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution was written in the nomenclature of the common law. The Supreme Court said over and over, you have to interpret the Constitution in light of the common law and its history. And I said, the common law has always said that a fundamental right that needs no positive law, needs no statutory enactment, is that every person has a right to their, quote, personal security, their liberty, the ability to move around, and their property, which is essentially what the due process clause is.
Mm-hmm.
But personal security was clearly defined in the common law as the right to your body, your limbs, and your health, in addition to your life. So before there was ever enacted crime against battery or assault, it was already unlawful. You didn't need to pass a statute for it, right?
Yeah.
And so the law always said, going back hundreds of years, that parents have rights rooted in the very nature of the authority that arises in the act of procreation.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written on it. It's not the act of procreation that biologically gives rise to rights.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that God in his providence has chosen to delegate to parents an authority when they procreate.
Yes.
See the difference, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you would say adoptive parents could never have parental rights.
Because they didn't
procreate. But the
that.
state can say, no. Those rights exist. They're usually associated with procreation. But if you and your wife adopt a child, we can bestow that on you because that's a substitute for the natural family when something's going wrong, right? So there were parental rights there. And the common law said that rights are really understood in response to duties.
Yeah.
We don't think of rights as necessarily corresponding to a duty.
Exactly.
So the parents have a duty and are the first security for the right of their child to their health, their limbs, and their body.
Yeah.
That's who God first delegated that authority.
You make sure that first line of defense.
So you have a duty to do that. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you could have no right to lop off your child's body parts.
Or kill them.
Or kill them. But it's impossible. You can't take a young boy and remove his gonads or a woman's breast buds because what? You've harmed their body, their health, right? Their limbs. And so no parent could ever argue for that. So why do we need to have a statute to say you can't do it? It's already the law. So what I said was, and it got defeated in Tennessee, because they didn't understand it, is that no parent shall have a right to violate the duty they owe to their child to protect their child's fundamental right to their body, their limbs, and their health. Period. I don't need 10 pages. The law's already there. All I needed to do was clarify in writing what the law already was.
I gotcha.
And then extend the statute of limitations to, 10 years after you reach adulthood. So, for example, if I were to get in a fight with you and for some reason, and I lop off your arm, right? The law says, okay, you can sue for that damage to your arm. You could sue me for that. Typically, the law would say, but you have to bring that lawsuit within 1 year for personal injury. Because witnesses die, things happen, and we don't want 20 years later, Eric decides he's mad at David, and it's like, well, where were the witnesses who saw the fight? Well, they're all dead. The principal and whatever else it is. So all you needed to do in this case was say, well, this kind of personal injury, you'd have a year to bring a lawsuit. But when you're misled about what your rights and your duties are, and you're not fully informed of all the consequences, and 10 years later you wake up and say, what did I do to myself? All you need to do is extend the statute of limitations. You don't need to write a 10-page law. So when we write the 10-page law, we are effectively saying there isn't any law that pre-exists anything that man enacts.
Okay, so legal positivism, from what I understand from our previous conversation, but of course for those listening who might not have listened to that previous episode, and I would encourage all of you listening, if you have not listened to the episode on the common law, it's a couple seasons ago, so just look through that, and I encourage you to listen to that. But positive law, essentially from what I understand, is like the idea that humans, namely a legislature, is creating law as if assuming that the law doesn't exist and that there's kind of like this vacuum out there, and that if they don't do it, if they don't make the law themselves, then you'll have anarchy.
You'll have no law. So when Christians take that attitude, see, they're really denying what they believe. That God has established a nature and a law, we might say a law of nature, that pertains to everything and the relationship of everything to everything. So I can use a rock, for instance. It has a law. It says, the law of the rock says, don't eat this. It has no nutrition. It says, but you can break it up and you can mix it with sand and some other things, and you can make a road. And that's okay with the law of nature. I'm glad you discovered how to make concrete, right? But then somebody says, oh, I could kill Abel with this. And they said, no, that's not why I put that law there. That's not the right relationship of the rock to man. It's a misuse of the rock. So what I mean by Darwinian thinking, and let me, if I can, let me just explain common law real quickly to folks who might be present now. Common law is what I would call a conception of law. Okay? It's like we have a conception of what marriage is. And you and I, we'd say, well, we could never be married. We could be the best friends, but we have this idea, this conception of marriage. And we would say it's a real thing, that when you exchange vows with a woman of a certain type, you're not leasing her, you're not renting her or employing her, you're marrying her, right? And if you said, I'll give you $1,000 a month to clean my sheets and cook my meals and have sex with me, well, then you've got an employee, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we understand that. So common law is a certain understanding that law exists independent of any human convention or contraption. That's what we're talking about. And common law was the idea that over time and centuries, we develop understandings of the nature of things. The old saying was that time runs out of mind. We can't ever remember when marriage wasn't a man and a woman. We can't ever remember a time when a father didn't have a right to, or a mother, to discipline their child. The customs and the traditions have been so determined over centuries that, well, of course, Eric and his wife have parental rights. That would be the common law. Now, you and I would say that that's true. The custom could be wrong. But how did we determine the custom? The judges make it up out of their head? No. They understood the concept of a natural law from a creator. That there's a nature to Eric that's different from his wife. They have functions that are different from their wife. They may even hold offices that are different from each other. A wife's office and a man's office would be different offices in their marriage. That's why you can't have two husbands. That's like having two presidents of the company. You just do it. So those customs were judged by reason in light of nature, clarified by Scripture. Okay, that was the key point. Was, you might say, well, Bob and Fred can have sex, and you'd say, well, Yeah, but Scripture would say that can't be a marriage. That's actually immorality.
Mm-hmm.
But they love each other. Well, maybe they do, but that can't be the custom. And if that did become the custom, at some point somebody would wake up and say, "We judge that custom wrong."
Yeah. When we say, well, they love each other, and we can kind of correct that and say, well, God is the one who tells us what love is, what love looks like, and what love does to a neighbor. And
Yeah,
you don't do those things to a neighbor if you love that
love
person.
them.
And I was also going to ask you a good example, perhaps, of this principle of the common law. You mentioned Cain and Abel, and it
Right,
would seem like, it was already wrong for
right.
Cain to murder Abel, and there was no legislature or
It's,
Congress at the time that made the law, and so it was already in existence because of God and because of them being made in God's image.
right. So Blackstone and the jurists before him, Matthew Hale, Bracton, they would have all said the law that man enacts about murder doesn't add anything to the law that's already there. Now, it might prescribe the penalties, and in
Okay.
some cultures it would vary depending on the gravity of the problem. Okay, just like it does in the Bible. If you go lie in wait, it's one thing. If you come upon a man and you get in a fight and you kill him, that's another thing. If your
Mm-hmm.
chariot wheel drops a wheel all of a sudden and you run into the other guy like a car wreck, well, that's another thing, right?
Yeah.
So that was a conception of common law, that there's law already there. What I meant by Darwin is that Darwin's theory leaves no room for law as Christians think of it. Everything is the product of something existed at some point. We don't know what it is, and it really doesn't matter. And it's just been development since then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's no room for spiritual to exist, or as the philosophers would have said, the metaphysics to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Or as the Greeks would have said, there's no given nature or essence to anything. It's just stuff.
So there's no, from that perspective, like there's no eternal law or common law or law made by God. It's just, things are changing over time, and that's just the way it is, and the way things that were done in the past doesn't really matter anymore.
That's right. Now, you could still have a kind of common law.
Hmm.
You could say, well, and this is what's happening. We don't appreciate it. The common law would have said that you can't injure your body, your limbs, okay, or the health.
Mm-hmm.
And that was true at that time. But as we've continued this process of development and evolution, and we now better understand what it means to be human, and that biology and concepts of gender, which you and I might call offices.
Mm-hmm.
Adam had an office. Eve had an office. We're all Adams or Eves, right? Well, that concept of gender is amorphous, so that common law history principle has to adapt because we've evolved. So you can remove the genitals if it assists you in conforming to your gender.
As you want it to be, as you.
That's right. That's right. So see, you could still have a historical law, but John Dewey would say, but history was for that time, and time is moving. Everything's changing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the liberals on the Supreme Court would say, well, yeah, that's what we used to believe, but we also used to believe that the principles of motion in the heavens were not the same as on the earth until Newton came along. And so everything's evolving. And so it's really true that I shouldn't get in a fight with you and castrate you. But if I'm doing it to help you achieve your fullness as a human, well, of course, that history has to change. So you'd still have a kind of common law, but not one the Christian would say is rooted in the truth of anything, given and fixed.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what came to my mind just now was, because, the difference between you doing something to me, hurting me, and then, or you doing something to me because I want you to, would be like the idea of consent. And so it seems like our culture is obsessed with consent in the sense that as long as you want it and the other person wants it, you can do whatever you want. And it's almost serving like a kind of common law. Like everyone in common all agrees people should be able to do whatever they want. Now, the problem, it seems like, is if you live like that, at some point, what you want to do hurts what somebody else wants to do, and it's not going to work out.
Sure, exactly. But your general statement would be true. There'd be sort of a common law, but not the common law I'm talking about, where there's a fixed principle, and you may decide, and this is what a lawyer would have to do, is they'd have to say, for example, the common law said you had a right to keep and bear arms. But we now have bazookas. We have cannons that fit on your shoulder.
That's right.
But was that what they were doing? I don't know. And you'd have to use those principles, and that's what the Supreme Court's done on the Second Amendment, to say, we didn't intend for Eric to have a full armory of bazookas, cannons,
and tanks,
or something, tanks, yeah. And so no, that's not within the scope of that. Or they could say it is, right? But they would still be going back to a fundamental historical principle, and then saying, how do we extrapolate? Which is what we do in the Bible all the time. Okay, food offered to idols. What do I do now with going to a party and the host offers me a glass of wine? Do I take it or not? Do I take it? Do I yell at him that he's violating the law of God? If it's a Christian that comes up to me and says, I sure hope you don't drink the wine with me. Okay, well, we're having extrapolation.
Yeah.
So Darwin leaves no room for any given nature, because nature is always in the process of developing and changing.
Yep.
So the theory is now, since the early 1900s, is that because all there is stuff, humans have to give the meaning to the stuff. Now that would be in philosophy called nihilism. There is nothing that's really true about anything, and we supply the truth to it. Happening with transgenderism in your pronouns. And
it's our truth. It becomes our truth.
It becomes our truth, but collectively we have to start to have a truth. And that's what we're seeing now, is that, well, we've collectively decided, here's the truth. If your daughter wants to be called he, well, that's now the collective truth. But when you have no room for that metaphysic, when you have no room for that given nature, and we have to supply that, what happens is words or names become placeholders in a particular culture or society. Well, we've now evolved. So the words have to change meaning, or you have to create new words like zir and zim. Well, we decided we're not going to do zim or zim, zer, but we are going to expand and change the meaning of the words, because you have to.
Yes.
And that's why we wind up with all this racism and colonialism. Everything was fitted for colonialism, so everything that was true in that period has to be destroyed and knocked down.
Yes.
That's a nihilist. And now we'll reconstruct the meaning of him or her or marriage. Yeah. So we live in a culture with nature not pointing to anything outside of itself. Now Christians say, well, of course, everything is pointing to God. Creation was intended to reveal God. We might not see it correctly, and under sin we won't.
Sure.
Or we won't use it right. We'll use the rock to kill our neighbor, but it's all revealing something that goes beyond nature. When you live in nihilism, you get the kind of law that you have in Colorado. And passing a different law won't resurrect the old worldview. It just stops it for a time.
I see.
Makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I was thinking about when you said about nihilism and about we have to create the value, or we have to make the value. It seems like that's like us playing the part of God, where previously God is the one that speaks things into existence. He gives things value. We're going to now play God.
And speak things in existence. And we're free to do that. So in that culture, you're not going to fix it with a positively enacted statute, because that statute can be repealed in the next 5 years.
That's true.
And until you restore the proper metaphysic or understanding of reality that's underneath the law, that law will continue to give way. It has to give way. And that's what we're finding in the Supreme Court in these religion cases. We've given away God and the doctrine of creation in the Bible because it's a little awkward to think that God created everything in 6 days and somehow he created light, but he didn't create the sun until the 4th day. So let's just kind of downplay all that.
Yep.
And move to moralism. And as a result, now we're arguing, and Herman Bavinck, I wrote a little piece on this the other day. Herman Bavinck said, once you've given away God in creation, you will continue giving away your ground until there's very little left. And then you'll be arguing for a spiritual dimension, which makes no sense in Darwinism.
Yeah.
And eventually the radicals will close that space.
Yes.
So every time Christians continue to make arguments as if all we are is matter and all we have to know who we are is science, we are affirming Darwinism in our approach and putting one more nail in our coffin.
So we're playing their rules, playing the game by their rules.
That's right. Exactly. So if I had simply said, well, there's already a law about it, and that's how I wrote it. The law already says you can't harm another person's body. The parents are the protector of their child's right to not have their body harmed.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, no parent can consent to this procedure, and the child, as a minor, can sue 20 years after they reach majority when they wake up and go, oh my goodness, what did I do? It's a simple bill. Parental rights. Here's the problem with parental rights. It's being done wrong everywhere in the nation. And I hate to say that. It sounds like I'm arrogant or whatever. But we wind up with 10-page bills trying to spell out, well, if the this is that, then this and this and this. And so we wind up niggling over the particular words and the meaning of the words, you see, rather than the substance. Well, what did this word mean here? And what does this word mean here? And I kept trying to say to the national legal organizations pushing these bills, you're using words in Obergefell world where they don't know what a man or a woman or a marriage is. So how in the heck are they ever going to know what a parent is or a parent and a child is or what a parent-child relationship is if they don't know the predicate for it? Interpret it according to this nihilistic, we make up the rules as we go along worldview. And that's why you have to use 20 pages and define every word. And then somebody's going to come niggle over the word. And you're assuming there's no parental right unless you pass a statute.
Yes. And I kind of wonder if maybe they do it because it makes them feel good. They feel like they're being productive and useful. Like, hey, I created this, helped create this law to protect, such and such rights. But like you said, they don't understand that, first of all, they're playing by the other side's rules. And then second of all, if it is the case that law only comes from men, from Congress, okay, using the term men very generically, well then, if the law is not perfect and doesn't cover every single scenario, then you're going to have to keep going back to Congress, like, hey, can you clarify? Can you, amend this and edit this? And, we need to update it. And it just seems like you're adding a lot of extra work.
What's funny is I've done a lot of historical research in all these areas with the law. And in Tennessee, it was in 1858, which is not that long ago. Tennessee decided to codify its laws. And every state today has, the Michigan Code Annotated or the Rhode Island Code. Okay, all the code. Well, all that comes from the French Revolution that said there isn't any law, and we have to develop a code to create law. In America, in the 1800s, began to be influenced by the French and the idea that there is no law until we codify it in the legislature. Okay, and Christians have bought into that. That's why these Christian lawyers write 20-page bills. because there isn't going to be a law if we don't do something, and we have to spell every word correctly. And next year we're going to have to come back and amend it because some judge interpreted husband to be gender neutral, right? I mean, they're doing that all across the country. The words in the statutes that say male and female are being treated as gender neutral. They didn't really mean that. My attorney general argued that in court against me, that they have to be neutral now because of Obergefell. Well, anyway, we bought into that. So in 1858, the code book in Tennessee, and you can see this, but all the statutes of Tennessee from its inception in 1796, I think it was, is probably 4 inches thick.
Wow.
And it's not even the size of an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, 4 inches thick. It's more like a book you can get at the bookshelf at the library, a David Baldacci novel or something, that kind of book. It's 4 inches thick. Every statute in the state of Tennessee. Now you have 70-something volumes that take up 5 pages. And I put that picture up there because I've got a picture of the two sitting next to each other. But see, when you moved away from God, you had to codify everything. The legislature had to enact everything. There was no common sense. And so I think these groups don't realize you've bought into Darwin and you don't know it. You think unless we enact a statute, there are no parental rights. Unless we enact a statute, a doctor can practice medicine by removing a child's natural reproductive system. So you're Darwinian, despite the fact that you go to church and recite the first line of the Apostles' Creed, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. No, you don't. You believe it's all development and that God didn't give things a given nature. And then to make it worse, you bring in doctors and say, science tells us this is wrong. Yeah. And I love Matt Walsh and these guys. I mean, I appreciate they've raised a stink about it. But if man is not something more than his biology, then we have no soul and spirit. So everything we're doing right now is contrary to the orthodoxy of our profession. And I'm not faulting them, except that I didn't know any of that. I came out of law school and I didn't know any of this. They didn't want me to know any of this. They never taught any of this. Mm-hmm. But when the Supreme Court said, really marriage is just about, literally they said this, not waking up in the night and finding yourself alone. That's what marriage is responding. That's almost a verbatim quote from the Supreme Court. I said, something's wrong. Yeah. And I've got to learn, marriage didn't come about because of the state. And it didn't come about because, Adam didn't want to wake up at night and not have somebody, give him a dog, let him pet it, right? He named it dog. So there.
There you go. No,
people don't want to learn that. It's a lot of work. And here's the other thing that I think happens. And I've written on this. You want to win in court. I want to win in court. I mean, I hate losing, right? And so you say, well, the current court, let's just look at the things they've currently said. And if I can somehow massage their statements in a way that fits my favor, then maybe I can win. And that'll be good, right? Parents will be protected. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but if you undermine your testimony, if you undermine the faith, and if you actually knew the history, you would have cases on your side. Mm-hmm. But you don't go back and look at the text and history. So you're destroying yourself for lack of knowledge, as it says, I think in Hosea.
Yeah, and they're trying to be pragmatic, it seems
Trying to be pragmatic. That's right. And not bear witness to the truth. And so we never argued that the common law, in the abortion context, the common law says clearly for hundreds of years, the child in the mother's womb is a person in the law. We never argued that because we don't ever think about going back to the foundations and saying, oh, they knew what that word meant. Yeah. We never think about what the founders meant by the word religion in the religion clauses. Yeah. And we lost the historical conversation that religion was really a liberty of conscience rooted in our freedom from guilt and sin, not conduct.
Yes.
But we're such Pharisees and legal positivists that we translate what the Puritans were fighting over in England into conduct. Now, let me give you just a quick example. The case in the Supreme Court last week over Oklahoma not giving a charter to a Catholic school.
I heard about this.
Very important case. And in one of the commentaries I wrote, I said, the state of Oklahoma quoted these precedents. And I took a section out of their brief and I said, they've cited 3 Supreme Court cases. Sounds just exactly right. Oklahoma wins. That it was lawful for them to deny the charter to a Catholic school because it would be establishing a religion, Catholicism, by the government's hand and tax monies. Oh, but the Christian legal argument was, well, yeah, but Catholics have a right to the free exercise of their religion, and under your free exercise clause, you're making participation in a public school system contingent on what your religious belief is, and you're discriminating against religion. And I said, so they cited 3 cases, they win. The state loses. Now, when your precedents put you in the position that you're having to say, what word oh gosh, I got precedents to say that Oklahoma wins. I got precedents to say Oklahoma loses. That's a sure sign you got something wrong. The First Amendment, look at it. It says Congress shall not. It's one sentence. The whole First Amendment is one sentence.
It's about Congress too, isn't it? Not the state.
That's the point. It says Congress shall not. Let's say I said this sentence. Eric Loophole is going to prepare for his podcast today and interview David Fowler. Then I'd put a semicolon. He will mix and master the thing and upload it to the podcast site, upload it to the podcast site, semicolon. Then he's going to go eat lunch and spend time with his wife and prepare for his doctoral dissertation, commas. If I said to you, is that one sentence? You'd say, yeah, that's one sentence. What's the subject of the sentence? Eric. Is Eric the subject of the sentence with respect to preparing for the podcast? Yes. Is Eric the guy that's the subject of the sentence regarding the mixing of the, yeah. Is Eric the subject of the sentence regarding uploading it? Yes. Is Eric the subject of eating lunch? Yes. Is Eric the subject of spending time with his wife? Yes. Is Eric the subject of preparing for his master's doctoral? Yes. So you have one sentence. It all refers to Congress. Now there's a historical reason, but notice this. In the rest of the Bill of Rights, there's never a subject. The founders said, these are the things we don't want our Congress, our national government doing.
Mm-hmm.
So this has nothing to do with what the states do. But yet, the Supreme Court, through the 14th Amendment, through the Due Process Clause, says a sentence applied to Congress now applies to the states.
Yeah, that's a big turning point there.
Yeah. And so as a result, I may not like what Oklahoma would do, right? But I like that Tennessee might fund the Catholic school or might fund the Southern Baptist school or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The point of our country was there are certain things nationally we don't do.
Yeah.
We spelled it out, Congress. We left the rest of this domestic policy on education and tax dollars to the states.
Mm-hmm.
But because Christians have failed to disciple the people in the states, and they've accepted a positivistic view of the world and a Darwinian view of the world, they're now in the minority, and they're clawing for some little ground that they can keep something, in essence trying to use the law to make up for their failure to do what Jesus said, disciple the nations, baptize them, and teach them.
Yep.
So we're living under nihilism. We have no room to go anywhere. And under nihilism, religion makes no sense. So you take the 10 Commandments out. You take out the concept of mom and dad, and we're just all a bunch of individuals. I know I'm talking too much, but no, we have to understand the times. That's what the sons of Issachar did. Yeah. And we think we can go slap a law out here on something, and that's going to fix the problem.
Hey, that's exactly why I wanted you to come on the show today, because this is important stuff, and we need to be very, very careful, and we need to be very wise and biblical in how we approach, statecraft laws, things like that, politics. So, but yeah, we are coming to the end of our time. So, do you first of all have any final thoughts, and then second of all, do you have like a place where folks can follow what you're currently doing? I know you're retired, but maybe like a website or a blog or anything.
Yeah. I do have a Substack page where I write on these issues. Recently, I've been writing on this First Amendment and the religion clauses and what they really meant. and it's called Senator Fowler 94 at Substack.com. And I often write a commentary. Every week I write some commentary for a new website called Cross Politic News, and on the Fight, Laugh, Feast sort of network there. And I've been talking about these First Amendment issues. So those are a good place to learn about that. But we've got a lot of learning to do, and that's really why I retired. Is I realized the Tennessee legislature wasn't interested in learning what they didn't know. So I thought I'll go talk to Eric and somebody else,
Hey, it has to start somewhere. We have to teach the next generation.
That's right. That's
so
right.
That, yeah.
So I'm meeting with a young law student right now, and he said something about amending the Constitution, and I said, well, that's for your generation. But I said, that's how we need to start thinking generationally. You don't build a whole cathedral in my generation. You teach Eric, who teaches his children. And someday we'll look back and we'll say, well, we finally got our Constitution and God back. And my point is, we're not going to get it back if we play by their rules.
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
Exactly. Thank you. That's a good point to end on. So, again, thank you, Dr. Fowler, for coming on today and chatting with me. I hope to have you on again in the future, and we talk about some other topics.
I'm retired, not going anywhere, so I'll see you then.
Sounds good. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that interview with David Fowler. I certainly did, and I think that the conversation on common law and how to understand the law is very important. And quite honestly, I don't always see the law the way that I should, and I've often fallen into the trap of the idea of positive law, where mankind just needs to create laws rather than adhere to an already existing common law. So I encourage you to think more about these things, and if you have any questions for David Fowler or for myself, just email me at thegbgpodcast@gmail.com or go to my website, ericloophole.com, and you can click on the podcast link at the top and submit your question that way. So thank you again for joining me. Until next time, take care and God bless.